I think we're live now. Yep, I got the thumbs up. So welcome to another session, one of our webinars for Saphyre. Today's topic, again, and as people who joined our last one, is about the FMSB standard and KYC data exchange. Before I go into any details, I'd like to remind everyone we will have a Q&A session at the end of our presentation, our discussion with Gerhard here. Please, if you're on the Zoom, you will see an option in the Q&A function to send your questions. Our folks, our admins, will actually aggregate those questions and let us know when they're ready to be shared. If you want to speak and ask your questions verbally, make that request in the Q&A function, and our administrators will take you off mute so you can ask the question and have a discussion with Gerhard and myself. Also, you can email your questions to events@saphyre.com. Again, that's events@saphyre.com. It's right there on the screen. We'll hold it on for another 5 seconds in case people have to write that down. But again, that's how you can access the Q&A. We want to make this as interactive as possible. And if we don't get to all your questions, we will follow up offline. We will reshare this when we get to the Q&A session. But now let's kick off. And I'm joined by Gerhard Kronsteiner. Why don't I let you make the introductions, Gerhard, about yourself, your background, what you do with Saphyre, how this all ties in.
Brilliant. Thank you for having me here, Gabino. So I joined Saphyre about 1.5 years ago, and after 20 years of industry, I'm here now, head of client solutions, and I'm the KYC product owner. And over the last 15 years, I was really looking into target operating models across the end-to-end process for banks and their counterparties. And KYC, of course, comes up in every of those. As I always say, KYC is the license to do business. And at the time of onboarding, everybody's excited and wants to start trading, but less so when there's annual refreshes comes or when there's KYC to exit a relationship. So I was heavily involved in this operating model, and especially over the last 8 years as managing director at BNP in the global markets business, I was looking at the client franchise and the operational excellence, how the banks can service their counterparties better. During that time, I was sitting on the Saphyre board, and that made me then move over to help build the platform and that network. And I was also a member of a working group from the FMSB, which we will talk to in a little bit later during the webinar.
Yep, I always like to say to folks that you drank the Kool-Aid and came to the dark side, so thank you for joining us. And in terms of my history and background, and everyone should hopefully who follow this webinar know who I am, Gabino, Roche, CEO and founder at Saphyre, but I used to work at JP Morgan. I actually helped with some of the KYC processes at the bank, and I remember some of the big pain points that we're heading into. And in fact, it was actually that experience and an experience at a consortium after JP Morgan that spawned Saphyre, the idea of Saphyre and what we've been doing to date. We'll get into more of that a little bit later in our webinar, but I guess let's talk about the issues that, let's say, folks or firms who are conducting KYC today. And we can talk about the banks that are doing it, whether you're a custodian, you're a broker-dealer, capital markets firm. But KYC is also done by other types of firms. The investment managers as well have to conduct KYC on their counterparties, on their underlying clients. But we're going to bracket those folks as KYC data requesters. So if you're requesting KYC data or documents, we're going to put you in the bucket of KYC data requesters. And I think there are plenty of challenges. I can definitely speak to it from experience, especially embarrassingly asking clients for the same documents over and over again. Can you talk about that experience real briefly from your time at BNP? I also have seen it from multiple banks from my experience at one of the consortiums I worked at. I'll talk about that in a minute. Gerhard, I'll throw it into your court first.
No, absolutely. Thanks, Gabino. It has to be done. KYC has to be done. And, the refresh process, which everybody goes through at a different frequency, is often not aligned. And when the requester is reaching out to their counterparties, they first need to look internally what data is available, then they scrap externally what data is available. They have no way to find anywhere private information, so they have to reach out to the client. The front office is putting pressure on the operations teams to make sure that the reach us is done in a structured way, but still it's done in an inconsistent way. You mentioned it, Gabino, often multiple different entities of a bank reach out to the same client during the year without coordination in between, without data sharing. And it goes as far as that regulators are fining requesters at the moment because the way of data collection is insecure. It's done by email, it's done in an infrequent way, and it's not done in a structured way. And that's where the banks are concerned, let alone the workforce of people sitting in the KYC process. And it's my experience that up to 30% of the KYC process is spent only on the document collection and getting the right data into the downstream process, Gabino.
Yeah, so let's give some breadcrumbs to folks, because they're going to say, we've heard this before, what makes it different? Trust me, we're going to talk about what the approach that Saphyre is taking is much, much more different. I think we have a visual to kind of help, because sometimes we can say words, but when you actually can visualize this, you can actually help people understand the problem, and we'll also visualize it for what the solution can provide. When I worked at JP Morgan, and I worked with some of these other banks who are asking for KYC documentation, let me say the quiet part out loud. The KYC teams were embarrassed to ask clients for the same documents that they may already have in their possession. And the relationship managers didn't want to hear that a client on the buy side or an asset owner finds out, or corporate, what, you're bothering them for that same document? Or the client, God forbid, saying to you, I just gave you that tax form 2 weeks ago, and now you're asking for it again, and you're interrupting my day, and I got to find this and whatnot. So there's clearly, we're going to get to a part where there's memory to remember all this in perpetuity, so you don't have to have this problem again. And this really requires common infrastructure, which we're going to come back to. But again, it's what you're saying. Collecting of documents for KYC is inconsistent between the different firms that are conducting the KYC. The documents are filed away in folders, but then those folders aren't labeled correctly. And how do you distinguish between, a document that's shared with the KYC team versus one that's maybe a little more sensitive that's shared with the credit risk team? How do you handle and remember the PII information that's being shared? We know passports and other things are being shared. And with GDPR and other things, the right to be forgotten is important. But if you have memory, that's something we can address. We'll come back to that again. And then when there's these high risk, you talked about this perpetual KYC or KYC refreshes. The frequency for collecting some of that information may be more often than for other entities. So how are we going to remember this to avoid this redundancy over and over? And again, if it's a batch process, every 6 months, every 3 months or whatnot, how do you avoid this non-real-time nature that may impact how trading is performed and how we can bring this to the trading aspect? Now, there's a converse to this. So everything we just talked about for a KYC data requester who's performing the KYC, there are equivalent pain points for the providers. So again, anyone who's responding to a KYC due diligence, a KYC refresh, is going through similar pains, only they're the ones supplying the information. And I'm just going to get ahead of it, Gerhard, by sharing that I know that I meet sometimes with tax teams at some of these buy-side firms and corporates, and they're like, every custodian, every tax agent, every sell-side counterparty, every electronic platform we do business with, we continuously have to send out this documentation over and over and over again. It's getting exhausting. And a lot of this is happening in a very unsecure method, email. Quite frankly, email is unsecure, and you're sending it over, which can be forwarded. There's sensitive information that's being captured on there. And it's, again, super, super repetitive. And then a lot of times there's commonality between what's asked from different data requesters. So several firms, 2 banks are asking for KYC. Some of the documents overlapping are the same. Is there a way to kind of handle that more in a bulk process? Before I move on, was there more color you wanted to add from the data provider aspect?
No, you called out the key points. And it's often frustration on the data provider side because they need to do it multiple times for the same company, different entities. And that is, they are eager to get a solution where it is in a structured way, and you do it once rather than multiple times.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. We could step away from the slides for a second, but what's required is, how do you create a common ground between multiple firms to share this? And when we talk about KYC, this is a very narrow use case, because we said KYC, perpetual KYC or KYC refresh, is really the repeat of the KYC activity. But where else is KYC documentation captured, right? And we know from the Saphyre experience, when you onboard with a custodian, KYC details are incorporated there. When you're onboarding with a capital markets firm, KYC details are incorporated there. When you're onboarding to even these electronic platforms or a tax agent, or let's say the fund accounting team, the outsourced middle office team, there's a bunch of the same documentation that needs to be supplied. And what's happening now is that same firm, maybe their KYC department is doing one activity, but then the onboarding team is doing a different activity, or the service you're subscribing to, again, is doing a separate activity, the tax team as well. All this stuff has overlapping relations to the same firm that's requesting the KYC data. So can we be smarter about this? Is there something different? We know there's plenty of KYC solutions out there. And we know many of the firms have created their own KYC solutions. So what are we thinking about that's different? I don't know if you have color on that, Gerhard, before I go to the next point.
No, I think to solve that problem, the industry need to come together on a platform where they can exchange that on a regular basis. So if you share your slide.
Yeah, so we'll get right to it. Exactly. It's about the collection process, right, Gerhard? I think what you're getting at. Today, a lot of the KYC solutions are one directional, which is a solution that sits with the KYC department, and then they input and collect that information. But how do we facilitate the exchange, right, is what you were getting at? Sorry.
No, absolutely. How we facilitate that exchange between the data requester and data provider. And you see here already that, bank one or broker one could be on both sides, requester and provider. So they have different roles in that. And then you do that once and done experience on that industry infrastructure network with the bi-directional flow. But there are two things what I want to make sure that the audience understands. This setup does not impact the risk appetite, the KYC policy, or the KYC process of the individual requester or provider. It's a space to share the data in a secure way, as we have laid out before. What it's also not, as the second case, it's not a data aggregator. What you see here is you share data which is publicly available and privately between these permissioned counterparties. That's nowhere at the moment available for that market infrastructure place.
Correct. So I think a big thing is, and again, I've worked on KYC solutions in my past life. Some of this actually led me to actually create the Saphyre solution. The biggest hurdle was not to publicly scrape public sources of information to collect the data and documents from there, but it was to collect the private information, and how to do so in a repeatable manner that was scalable. And so the idea here is, if a buy-side firm is actually setting up a custodian account, and then they're doing setups with the trading counterparties, that documentation is the same documentation that can be used for the KYC teams for the KYC and initial KYC, as well as perpetual KYC. So this is what we mean by a one and done experience. And if you, the beauty of this is, and we literally have firms that go through this right now, a tax team that has to respond to every market, let's say India, Brazil, US, UK, for a global custodian and their respective sub-custodians, you have to supply tax forms for that. You have to supply the same tax forms to the sell-side counterparties for the KYC due diligence. Again, the tax agents that you're going out to and whatnot. So as a byproduct of conducting or distributing your KYC documentation and data, you can also have this have impact on the other use cases, the onboarding and maintenance activities related to your accounts for those same institutions and anyone else. So let's say broker number 2 is conducting an earlier KYC with you, but broker number 1 is conducting theirs 12 months later, right? If you upload that new tax documentation, annual report, articles of incorporation, whatever it is, that platform is going to remember everyone else you previously permissioned those documents and send it to them proactively. So the idea is you're proactively keeping up with this information and not having to do it again later. So when the new KYC refresh occurs with broker number 1, for example, they will already have that documentation in hand in front of them because someone else had already previously provided it to you. This is what I mean by creating this repeatable process where you don't have to do one by one by one, but it's actually rather one and done. So I think the idea here is, if we go, I think we have one more view of this. So Saphyre has come out with a solution now that we're calling our KYC Platform. And I'm going to let Gerhard, for you to kind of walk through this. But this is much of the repeat of this one and done experience, but now taking it specifically with the lens of the KYC requester versus the KYC provider, data provider. And I think the important thing here, as you said, you can be conducting KYC on a firm, but also responding to a KYC request and providing data for KYC. And that's the beauty of this, this visual. But I'll let you speak to it.
No, fantastic. And I think that will change the industry, how the KYC document collection is done. Let's start on the left-hand side, the requester or the bank in most of the cases. They would upload the requests as a bulk for their companies, and can request that from client 123 in that organization. Either it is already on the platform, then it's available instantly if that client 123 permissions the bank to see the profile. If it's not already on the platform, then the client would be asked to provide it to the platform and has then the benefit to share it to multiple organizations. Let me be very clear here. The provider is in charge and can permission who is allowed to see that profile or who is not allowed to see that profile. When you have that data on the platform, you do not need to load data which is available on a registry, for example, Companies House, and we use Glyph as a feed into our platform as well, so that you don't need to fill the same information which is already. What data do we request? Well, that's the beauty of the KYC platform now linked to the FMSB standard, because what we request there is in line with the standard, and that will cover 90% of the data and document requirements, what everybody needs from the requester side. That includes the source of funds, source of wealth, information around the directors, and then the supporting documents, what Gabino referred to, the incorporation documents, the tax documents, etc. So really the requester has here a client-facing platform where they can, at the point when they need to do the refresh, send that information. But now the new thing on the provider side is also that the corporate or the asset manager or the bank can make the data available when they feel it's the right way. So for example, if you maintain on the platform your profile, you can maintain it once a year. That's the minimum we require. And if then there is a change, the banks you have enabled get a notification. Gabino talked a lot about perpetual KYC. That is triggering the banks to look into the change of circumstances. And then it's up to the banks to decide if that is triggering a KYC refresh or not.
This is where we create this like one and done process, because what's not accounted for is we look at these KYC refreshes in isolation. What we're saying here is a platform that provides an infrastructure for the industry is accounting for all the relevant maintenance events that are not related to KYC but may impact KYC is being accounted for here. And there was a little nuance. So there's the KYC solution in general, globally, that Saphyre is offering, which is a way to scalably permission your documents and your data and account for all the onboarding and maintenance activities that are going on to create a one and done benefit. The other thing that happens here is because of these global jurisdictions like the United States, you may have entities that don't have LEIs, but we can handle them with their tax IDs and jurisdictions, and we can handle it with pending LEIs. If there's an LEI, we integrate with Glyph today with a real-time API, so we synchronize that information that's already available out of the box. On top of that, because you're establishing these relationships with these banks as a data provider, Saphyre can then proactively share new information or changes on those informations to those banks on the data requester side. Now specifically, because we talked about the FMSB, they created a new standard. I'm going to let Gerhard speak to that, but he mentioned Company House, and that we have that here. So for the UK, for example, if you were providing documents as a data provider, Saphyre has an API that synchronizes with Company House. We already know the beneficial owner entity that you're actually sharing KYC data from, and we can provide those documents in real time. You can do a comparison, so you don't have to hunt for it. If it's already there, you can apply it to the KYC, and we make that available to the KYC requester. And the idea here is this is a global solution, so right now this works for one jurisdiction, in this case for Company House, right, in the UK. And we can collect all the private information on top of that. But then globally, we can do this for any other jurisdiction. And I know already, Gerhard, you talked about that Spain and France and Canada are on the roadmap to do the same thing. But I'll let you segue into that.
No, I agree. There are two key things which we base the KYC platform on. One is the Saphyre platform. So you have all the benefits of the API, the chat functionality, and what have Gabino said before. And in the UK, we leverage that FMSB standard. So what is that? In 2022, the Bank of England has raised a report and said, we in the UK want to make the financial services place more safe. So what they have done is they reached out to the industry and said, look at the KYC process and improve that. And they have tasked the FMSB Financial Market Standards Board to create a working group. was then 30 sell-side and buy-side companies working together on that working group. And I was lucky to represent BMP in there. And we looked into what is the most difficult part in the KYC end-to-end process. And as we said before, it's that data and document collection part. So that working group has issued now a standard on the 19th of December, which lays out in the annex the data and document points, which 90% of the industry needs. And this is the data and document points we initially request on that KYC standard. Global business into the KYC platform to that standard. Then every bank has follow-up questions, and that depends on the jurisdictions, that depends on the product, that depends on the risk appetite of the bank. Those follow-up requests can be done on the platform. Always in that secure environment, you know is logged in as your counterparty. You can check with that counterparty on status. You can chat with that counterparty on follow-up questions. And you have anytime that overview where you stand. And as we said before, if something's changing, you get that notification. So to Gabino's point, we start in the UK. We prove that this is working based on the standard. Many other countries are already interested. And all of our Saphyre clients and clients interested in KYC have a global approach. So that's where we evolve to as a second step in the next couple of months.
Yeah, I think it's important for people to understand that there's two ways that you can go about this. You don't have to replace your KYC process with what Saphyre is offering with the KYC platform. The risk analysis, the due diligence can stay the same. If you have solutions that address it, they can stay there. At a minimum, what's unique is Saphyre's facilitation of the collection of data and specifically the documents, because we have the memory to remember which documents are permissioned to who, for what circumstances, when they're expired, and we also manage the rules. And we're able to actually ping these repositories like Company House and elsewhere. So even though we started in the UK, it's live globally. It's not just the UK. The reason, though, is the FMSB just passed their standards. So the good news for the entities in the UK, companies like British Airways, is that you leverage Saphyre as a data provider. It's a one-and-done experience because now the KYC standard for collecting documents is the same for all of the KYC that occurs within the UK. And then you can do these documents one time as a network effect to those banks on the platform. I'm just conscious of time, Gerhard, so we want to make sure we get the Q&A. And believe it or not, I'm already seeing that folks are entering questions in the Q&A function on Zoom. So I think it's a good time to kind of segue to the, oh, actually, wait, I think we have one more thing that we wanted to point out. So before we go to the QA, let's cover the salient points that we wanted to cover on what we discussed today. And so the things that are unique that we're actually offering with the KYC platform is a bidirectional flow, not just one directional, and not just something that works within the KYC department and their system. It's a way to exchange between a data provider, potentially a client, and the data requester for the KYC. The other thing we're talking about here is there's a one-and-done experience. So we're not just doing this for KYC, we're combining this in conjunction with any work that's happened on the platform regarding onboarding, maintenance with custodians, outsourced middle office, fund accountants, tax agents, broker-dealers, capital markets firms. All that's now rolled into one so that the KYC, initial KYC and KYC refreshes are also included. We're bringing memory of data and documents, so you don't have to remember who you have to re-permission documents to. If you're being asked for a tax form that was expired for the India market, you update it once. We'll also send it to all your KYC data requesters as well. If you have a KYC refresh with one party and you refresh your documents, we'll also remember and proactively permission it to the other party so they have it on hand. We didn't talk much about this, but we identify PII documentation and then allow you to have the right to be forgotten, which is something that, again, the platform's memory capabilities makes this super, super valuable and unique, especially where you're under those regime pressures from a regulatory standpoint. And I already hit on the last one, which is how we're tying this with the onboarding and maintenance with the one and done. So let's segue to the Q&A, because again, I know we're getting halfway through the to the bottom of the hour. But oh, reminder, my team is signaling to me offline here that our next webinar is scheduled for February 20th. So we always like to let people know that we're going to be doing this at a regular cadence. Again, the next webinar, February 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, Standard. And the topic's around AI innovation with legal agreements and negotiations. You don't want to miss that. That's going to be a lot of fun because I get to geek out a little bit on some of the work that I've been doing with my team on teaching AI and how we help extrapolate terms and whatnot. So this is something really unique and exciting for us. Again, that's February 20th, 12 p.m. Eastern. Mark it in your calendars. With that being said, one more time as a reminder for the Q&A, there's a function within the Zoom. If you hit Q&A, you can ask your questions. Our administrators will then make it available for Gerhard and myself to see. If you'd like to ask your question verbally, please put that into the chat and they can unmute you to ask your question. Or you can email your questions to events@saphyre.com. And again, if we don't get around to it, we'll come and circle back with you. With that being said, I'm going to pull up the questions, Gerhard, and I'm going to see what the first one here is this built for the UK? What about other markets? I think we kind of answered that, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a very good question. KYC is a global process. All of the stakeholders are global. So we start in the UK because that's where the FMSB standard is. But we really want to cover the global approach here for the banks and also for the data provider, investment managers, corporates, and others.
Yeah, we think there's a opportunity here because the FMSB just issued their standard, so we're showcasing the capabilities for the UK, but in no way does this mean it's only for the UK. It actually works for all jurisdictions, and we currently do that now on the platform. But let's go to the next question, and I think this goes to one of your qualifiers earlier. It says, are you performing the KYC risk analysis as well? So Gerhard, we kind of touched on this.
So at the moment, the KYC platform, what we have on Saphyre, is that data and document exchange. We are not at the moment supporting individual organizations on risk analysis, risk scoring, etc. So the KYC platform is not performing that work, but is exchanging the documents to the standard and then beyond, as we laid out before.
There's one qualifier I would say, though. We are asking questions. There are questionnaires that we do supply, and we can actually capture that from the clients. Now, the risk rating is really what you're getting at, Gerhard, which is because every firm has a bespoke risk rating on how they want to assess the risk with those clients. We haven't touched that piece, but collecting the questions and the documents and the data points, that is all incorporated as part of the platform and making it bilateral. And we're allowing your clients to self-serve. That's the other part about this. The clients are actually proactively yet leveraging this, or the data providers that we called, to supply that information to you. Okay, let's move on to the third question, because actually we have like 3 or 4 more here. How does PII work? How does this work for PII? Which I think I just hit on before. So I'll just re-emphasize real quick. We identify documents like passports and others as personal identifiable information for folks who don't know what PII stands for. And we also then not only tag it, we can also control who's permission to see it and also help you with the regulatory obligation of the right to be forgotten. In 7 years, I think, is GDPR. California has certain rules on, I think it's 5 years. So this is hugely valuable from a maintenance standpoint and ensuring you're respecting the data provider's privacy under the regulations that have been passed. So we're going to move on to the next one because I see there's more questions. Gerhard, when will this be live? Someone asked.
No, and this is the beauty. We have active exchange on the platform today. So we have started in November with testing, and people have used it since then. And we do have live exchange. We have corporates using it. We have banks using it. We have the...
So yeah, it's live. That's what we're saying. It's live, and it's live globally. Because I already see some guys, I'm going to hit on it. So let's keep this going, Gerhard, if you don't mind. So there was another one saying, does this handle KYC refresh? And I think we were seeing perpetual KYC.
Yes.
Yeah. So the answer is yes, but it's the phrasing. People say KYC refresh, KYC update, perpetual KYC. All 3 of those mean the same thing. The answer is yes. We do handle that. This is a little longer, this question, so just bear with me. It says, how can changes to the client profile or new entities added to the same umbrella automatically reflect in Saphyre's ecosystem? Manual inputs from the buy side or Saphyre integration to client custodian systems? So I can start with answer unless you, okay. Just real quick, so yes, there can be manual key entry from the clients when you take them on. But if you leverage Saphyre with a particular client, let's say they onboard an account with you or whatnot, we will automatically aggregate the KYC data for you already, and then you can actually have this segue to the KYC platform. If you're the custodian already and you've performed an onboarding on an account, the documents you collected as part of the custodian onboarding will already be made available to you for the KYC platform to conduct the KYC. So when you want to do perpetual KYC afterwards, you already have the documents in Saphyre, it will already be made available to you, and then you only have to ask for what you need it to be refreshed. If you already have the documents and the refresh trigger hasn't been triggered, you don't have to bother the client. You can avoid the embarrassment like I used to live in asking for a client for the same documentation multiple times. So there is a combination of manual input. There's also a combination of where you already gathered it through another process. And someone talked about the same umbrella. So there's some legal functionality that Saphyre has for umbrella agreements and what entities are included. If you want, please reach out to us. We can show you how we track umbrella agreements and the entities, and as part of that process, collect the KYC information. So yes, that is all integrated. Hopefully that made sense. It's an anonymous question, so I can't say a name. Gerhard, did you want to add more to that one? We got more questions, by the way.
Perfect.
Okay, this is awesome.
We go to the next one.
Yeah, so it says, any regulatory challenges related to cross-border exchange of information?
So at the moment, what we do is like the data provider permissions who is allowed to see it on the data requester side. So there's the joint agreement between the two of them to share data. And at the moment, we don't have issues there. What I want to mention to this question from Oriel is we also have regulatory data which could be shared on the platform. Stepping away for a second on KYC, regulatory data is at the moment not refreshed. The MiFID classification, the EMIR classification, and so on and so forth. We have that built in on the Saphyre platform, on the KYC platform, that we could use that, because I do expect that it's coming in the next couple of years, but happy to take that offline with the...
Yeah, I think Oriel may also be asking that maybe another regulatory challenge might be around where the documents are stored. So for example, Saphyre can actually host servers in a jurisdiction so long as both parties are in the same jurisdiction. So for example, I think in Singapore, for example, if all the parties are in Singapore, the expectation is the documentation is only held within Singapore. But if you're dealing with a bank in North America, in the US, then therefore it's like email. You just sent that documentation. A version will be held in Singapore and a version will be held in the US. So there's two ways we could have answered that question, Oriel. If you got questions, please email us. We'll happily take it offline. Another question we have from John here is, any plans to support the process in the US, Gerhard?
Absolutely. Some of the users on the platform are US houses, and we have, next in February, attending conferences, etc. So yes, there is a plan to roll that out in the US as well. Yeah,
the functionality is live, let's be clear, so you can use this today. What the difference is in the UK, they've issued a national standard for the UK, and now we're leveraging that and connecting to Company House to be able to provide this availability. But in no way does that prohibit you from starting in any jurisdiction globally to collect the documentation on KYC from your clients. And then I think there's one last one is, can you help us support the business case? So not sure
the answer is yes. We're happy to discuss with the individuals. It's different business case on the requester side than on the provider side. But there's significant efficiencies which can be lifted if that data exchange process is standardized or on the infrastructure we offer.
Well, what we also can say is with clients that we see already, they see a 75 to 95% benefit in the reduced email traffic from leveraging the platform. Data providers definitely see that. Data requesters can actually decrease over 50% of their requests around documents because we let them discover that they already have the document in their possession. Okay, and then we can also help permission between departments. So if you actually leverage Saphyre beyond just the onboarding or KYC team and you include your tax team and some of the other downstream teams, then the teams can actually know what the full scope of documents they have in their possession, so you reduce the outreach to the client. So those are big use cases, and we already know there's repeat. We haven't even touched on the fact that Saphyre provides the ability to KYC at point of post-trade allocation, so you can allocate safely and settle your trades. So there's also another benefit from a post-trade standpoint. We didn't even cover that topic today. So yeah, I think those were all the questions. Again, folks, if you have more and we have closed the webinar today, you can always still email us at events@saphyre.com. Again, that's events@saphyre.com. Let's remind everyone one more time when our next webinar will be hosted one more time. That is February 20th at 12 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be covering AI innovation with legal agreements and negotiations. That, again, it's going to be a personal fun thing to cover. We're going to bring our CIO. We're going to talk about the work we've done with AI and even some of the things we're doing with Microsoft. For now, we appreciate everyone's time. Thank you for joining. If you'd like to learn more about the KYC platform, please register or actually email us at, or go to our website at saphyre.com/demo. You'll see a form to fill out your information if you'd like us to send you some more information. And thanks so much. We'll end it here. Gerhard, appreciate it.
Thank you, Gabino. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
All right, take care. Bye.